Hello, everyone. Welcome to night 21 of the Orphan's Tales live reading series. 3 weeks. It's our 3-week anniversary. Happy 3-week anniversary to all of you. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for my voice tonight. I was teaching a class up until 5 minutes ago on Zoom, my first experience with Zoom. For Clarion West, so I'm that slightly manic of I spent an hour and a half pretending I know what I'm talking about, and my voice is a little shredded, so I apologize for that. It's exciting tonight. We've got a new SJ song because we're heading to the Book of the Sea, the water elemental of this series. So yeah, it's cool. I remember so little of what's about to come. Like, I remember way more of the previous part than this. And I've already flipped through and been like, oh, I thought that was in the next book. Guess not. Oh, well. So it will definitely be an experience for all of us. So let's do our housekeeping. Hi. As always, for legal purposes, this is not an audiobook of the Orphan's Tales. This is a play. It is a one-woman show. The music we are listening to is by S.J. Tucker, who's done 2 albums based on these books. You can find them both, along with all of the rest of her oeuvre, at sjtucker.com. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valenti. You can follow me on Twitter at Cat Valenti. And you can... you can put a coin in my tip jar if you would like to. There is one in my Instagram profile and one on my website at catherinevalenti.com. I understand if you can't. Everything is terrible and on fire. But if you are so moved and you can, everything is terrible and on fire over here as well, and it is deeply, deeply appreciated. Thank you so much to Lynn and Catherine, who tipped me yesterday. You are my absolute heroes, and I will thank anyone who does so on the next stream. Yeah. Oh, and the thing I always forget, the 2 things I always forget, you would think I would have it after 21 nights, but I don't. You can catch up with the archive on my YouTube channel at Cat Valenti Live. Although this is a great night to start because this is a whole new story cycle, so you haven't missed anything yet. Although you will have missed the connections, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. And you can ask me questions at the end of this stream, but things tend to move quick, and I sign off if nobody asks anything, so think of the questions that you might like to ask while I'm reading so you can get them in quickly. I will warn you, we have had horrendous internet problems today. So if there is lag, or if it decides it would like to not be an internet anymore, I deeply apologize. It's not our fault. It's a nightmare in Router Town. So just warning you ahead of time. I'm going to have one more sip here because my voice is already shredded. Now let us, you can hear the end of that song on her website. It's a really, really good song. Hearing it live is something else. All right. The Book of the Sea. In the palace. But father, Dinazad cried, her voice breaking like a green branch. Her violet eyes flashed indignantly, and there was a high flush in her fair cheeks. He was with the demon. I saw them. And I believe you, daughter, the Sultan chuckled, shaking the beard that curled down to his chest like a fall of blackberry brambles. You really mustn't get so worked up about the children under your care. Children, especially young boys of your brother's station, must be allowed some small indiscretions. It is good for my digestion to see them rebel a little. It keeps them from rebelling a lot. Dinarzade frowned, planting her hands on her hips in a fashion she imagined she had often seen on her own nursemaids. Father, I hardly think this is a small thing. He might have brought that awful child's curse upon all of us. I don't understand why you've not banished her once and for all. Couldn't you leave her to rot on some distant hillside? I perceive that you have a cruel heart, child. It lies within your breast like a smoldering blade, hissing steam at me. So long as she does not enter the palace, we do not risk her devilment. When you have lived as long as I, you will learn a little more about dealing diplomatically with demons. To banish her to the wilds would bring down the vengeance of whatever creatures gave her birth. Why should she concern us? She does not even approach the silver gates or the corners of the house, and the boy has promised not to see her again. For the snowy summit of all these things, however, is the fact that you simply cannot go about locking your siblings in towers when they misbehave. It is unseemly and betrays a sad lack of creativity. Find another way, Dinarzad. That is all. The Sultan dismissed his daughter with a wave of a gold-ringed hand. She blushed deeply red, the shade of harem silk, and walked out into the throne room with a stiff spine, holding her dark head high. That girl is a little autocrat. It is a pity she is not a son. She would have made a fine sultan, the monarch mused, turning to his supper. Of course, Dinarzad was bound to obey her father's word. But as she wove through the halls like a swift loom, she rubbed her shoulders where one of her mothers had beaten her for allowing such treason in their house. She was cruel because it was necessary. The Sultan did not take the time to know that the indiscretions of the children were visited upon her by the harem. The bruises flared blue and yellow on her skin like wings, and her eyes watered painfully. In her mind, she was already devising a new punishment as she ascended the thin spiral of the tower, and it grew in her like a slim stalk of wheat. Turning the heavy key in the lock, she entered a high room where she had left her brother. She was entirely prepared to find him gone, the room empty as a dried well. She steeled her stomach for it, hardening her flesh against blows to come. Instead, the boy lay sleeping on the windowsill, his tousled head resting against the wind-washed stone, eyes darting beneath his lids as though he were deep in dreams as thick as mulled wine. The sun shone through his hair, turning it to embers in an iron grate, to black-rimmed flames. Dinarzad allowed herself a soft smile, pleased at his reluctant obedience. Nevertheless, she shook him awake, and her voice was rough as crocodile hide. "Get up, you little urchin. You've slept far too long. Today you will work in the kitchen. If you like to roll around in the garden like a dog, you might as well go beg for scraps. And the royal guard is dining at the palace tonight, so there's plenty for you to do. By the end of this day, you will be so exhausted you will not even dream of your little demon friend." The boy woke quickly. He knew better than to show her grogginess or the sand of his night eyes. He followed her in a sullen humor down from the tower and into the bowels of the palace. The kitchens were as noisy as a stampede of oxen, oven fires leaping and steam bubbling from copper pots as though some magic brew steeped within them. Cooks and maids moved with great gestures, bellowing at each other with equal fury, their smocks stained with all manner of colored sauces, syrups, and spices. Dinarzad gave him a harsh shove into the room. "Cook will look after you. You obey her now. I don't fancy returning to this inferno today. One prefers to see food only when it is pleasantly upon the plate. Have a lovely day, little brother." And with this, she disappeared into a flurry of white skirts and dark flowing hair. Cook towered over him, a great hulking cow with cheeks fat as a hound's jowls and a belly that tumbled over the waistline of her apron in a massive heave of flesh. Her eyes were a pale, fishy shade of blue, and her right one had gone a bit rheumy, so that when she looked him over, her gaze seemed to slither on his skin like a snail. She appraised him like a general sizing up a soldier. "Ugh," she grunted, her belly shaking with the sound. "Soft thing like you isn't fit to cook a scrap of toast, so you better get to washing the flagstones. Stay out of the way of my feet and no stealing." She gestured at a wooden bucket of gray water that stank of lye and hurtled toward a clutch of chefs, faster than he would have thought possible, like a hippopotamus after hapless riverboats squalling at one of the helpless maids. The boy scrubbed until his fingers were raw and wrinkled as paper pulp, but he was secretly filled with delight, hiding it within him like thieves' gold. He would be able to bring the girl such a feast tonight. Anything she could possibly want from the vast kitchens. They were preparing a huge banquet for the royal guard, who were so rarely barracked within the palace gates that their entrance caused a lavish holiday to spring up like dandelions in the courtly soil. The gargantuan boar had been killed earlier in the day, and it sat on the central table like a mighty lord, glistening with fat. All he had to do was wait until the maids left, scurrying like muskrats to serve at the banquet hall, and the cooks went to report the menu to the stewards. Then the great boar would be unguarded. And indeed, as the night drew on the sky like a bodice, lacing it with the last beams of sunlight, the kitchen cleared of all its citizens, and he was alone. Cook, by this time, had probably forgotten his existence entirely. Slicing off a few fat pink hunks of boar flesh with his little dagger, he rearranged the slick green garnish to cover the missing meat and cast about for further treasures. He smuggled sugared loaves and a rind of cheese in his vest, packing them in with smoked fish and a few of the little dormice soaked in pepper and honey that the Sultan favored. As he made his escape, the boy looked back over the sorry prison his sister had devised, and with a grin snatched the shining red apple from the boar's mouth. He crept out the door on his quietest feet, stealing past the glittering silver gate and into the garden, clutching his prizes to his chest, where his heart beat like a hammer striking an ivory bell. In the garden. But the boy did not find her that night. He sat on the lip of one of the great marble statues, his feet resting on the stone tail of a dancing mermaid, and ate his cold pork and apple alone. He could not understand why she would break her promise, why she would not appear as she always had, as if by magic, to deliver her stories to him all dressed in silk and silver. As he chewed his honeyed meat in the dark, he looked into the spray of stars and pictured her face to himself, the private face that was revealed when she was deep in her tales, her smoky eyes shut and moving beneath black eyelids. A terrible fear was born in him suddenly. Perhaps she did not like him at all, and only wanted to tell her tale so her curse would be broken, so that whatever strange miracle dwelt in her stained eyes would release her from the garden. Perhaps he was nothing to her but an ear. Trembled with it, the crawling cold that chewed his bones. She had abandoned him, and what was left was the roiling weight of sorrow and silence, her absence like a statue in the glowering moon. That night of all nights he accomplished his deception easily, and drew the bedsheets over his knees as the sky was beginning to flush an icy gold. On the last night of the full moon, he wandered out into the western wing of the garden, where a small lake lay glittering in the cool light, filled with gilt-eyed fish. He had not brought food, having not much hope of finding her. He had returned to eating meals with his brothers after the term of his punishment was complete, and food was difficult to smuggle. Dinozad redoubled this by eating solemnly at his side each night and ignoring the stares of the other sons. He hated her, her thin fingers peeling back the skin from roasted quail, holding her knife at the angle they had all been taught, as though it were an effortless habit, and not the result of years of slapped knuckles. He crouched at the grassy edge of the clear water, scowling into the sparse mist and picking at pebbles underfoot. The boy's mouth had taken on a permanent sickle-like frown, little moon whose horns were drawn ever downward to the black earth. He began to skip stones on the placid water, listening to their satisfying plink, plink, plunk, when suddenly a gleam of star and shadow on skin caught his eye, and his heart leapt into his throat like a starving fish after a dragonfly. The girl stood waist-deep in the water, her long charcoal hair clasped into a wet nest at her neck with willow lips, the lake beating on her stomach, her small breasts, arms outstretched, as though she were trying to catch the moon in her arms like a child. Her eyes were shut, she did not yet see him, so he watched her unabashedly, unable to move or call to her, rooted to the mossy soil by the vision of her rising out of the night, pale as the gasp of a star's breath, and the closed eyes floating black and secretive in her ghostly face. His own breath would not come at all. The girl opened her eyes slowly, though truly it was as though she closed them, hiding the dark stains of her eyelids with the cold light of her eyes. She looked directly at him, and he flushed deeply, expecting her to be angry, to retreat from him in shame. Instead, she simply stared at him calmly, the moon and the water still pooling on her body, and made no move to cover herself. They stood this way without motion for some time as the wide-leaved trees whispered to each other overhead. Finally, the girl waded to shore and pulled her ragged shift over her head. He rushed to the mound of thick grass where she sat, and without meaning to, reached out and gripped her by the shoulders. "Where have you been?" he choked. "I've looked for you for 7 nights." The girl cocked her head to one side like a sparrow considering a handful of seeds. You said you'd tell me another story, more strange and wonderful than the last. I thought... He stared down at his hands helplessly. I thought you wanted to tell me your stories. I thought you would tell me all of them. I'll tell you another if you like, she answered, her voice still and cool. What's wrong? Why have you hidden from me? The girl brushed a fluttering strand of her hair behind her ear. I have not hidden, or at least I have not meant to hide. It is only that you have not found me. The garden is wide. I'm sorry. Folk have come and gone since you last heard my voice, and I could not be seen. She looked at him in that strange bird-like way again, a light sparking deep in her eyes. Would you like to hear another tale from the folds of my eyes? A tale of ships and saints, of maidens and beasts and a dreaming city? The boy bit his lip. He felt that the polite thing to do was to ask how she'd fared, if it had been very hard to escape the notice of one or another noble lord if she'd eaten well without him. But he had not heard the promises of her fantastic creatures in so long that they sounded in his belly like the tolling of church bells, like anchors dropping in a soundless sea, and he felt such desire for them he could not be polite. Tell me the tale, please, he whispered. The girl settled herself in the grass, under the perfume of cinnamon trees and stars like hanging gardens, and spoke, her voice once again as wide and soft as the hide of a jungle cat. Once, there was a girl named Snow, and she had no one in all the world to love her. The Pale Girl's Tale. Now, she had not always been called this. The girl had once lived in the city of Ajanab, a warm and well-built place which sat fat and rich on the golden silt of a wide river delta, scarlet flags flapping proudly, the streets winding marvelously through its jeweled heart. She was loved and safe in her mother's house, and expected that her life would continue in that way forever, with the cinnamon-scented wind on her skin as she slept. But Ajanab faltered, as cities will, and the day came when her fisheries were no longer full, and her merchants no longer so eager to pull the sludge of the river to reach her glittering harbor. Slowly the people left their whitewashed houses. Slowly they abandoned their thick-soiled fields, which had once been so lovingly and reliably inundated by the clear green waters. Snow, unremarkable among so many others who would never again call the warm-winded Southlands home, stood with her parents on the deck of a ship as the pearl-domed city retreated in the distance, until it was nothing more than a glowing line against the sea. She stared over the rail of the ship for days, her hair becoming tangled and salted with the wind, though her parents begged her to come below. They were bound for the glacial north, and other harbors, great and small, where whale meat and seal fat were to make new fortunes for all the lost children of Ajanab. Bound for the city of Muran, which lay on the grey waters of its stormy bay like a child against its mother's breast, hope to every ship that crossed the diamond-tipped waves. But the passing had been difficult for her parents, who could not bear the savage cold. Even less were they prepared for life in Muran, where winter never seemed to end, and whose people were as frozen and implacable as the snow on a flat roof. The endless chill set into their bones, and before her family had passed a year in the salt wind and the sea, Snow's parents died. She grew surely as an ash tree, and lived as near to a beggar as it was possible to do without starving, mending nets with the fishwives when they would let her take some of their work, scurrying through the docks on odd errands simply to get a beaten coin to buy bread and seal fat to moisten it. Though she was resourceful, Snow was not a beautiful girl. Her face was plain, unremarked, and unremarkable. Her eyes were a watery shade of green, like sickly lakes caught in a lightless winter. Her lips were small and perpetually chapped. Her skin was neither the milk smooth of girls who ate breakfasts of oranges and strawberries on silver plates, nor the hardened brown of the dock workers' daughters. She chewed her nails and picked at the skin on the back of her hands. Though she was as old as any of those girls, the ones who spent their days entertaining suitors in parlors of brocade and soft laughter, folk that passed her on the streets of the village thought her a child. She never grew as tall of leg or fair of hip as those charmed ones. In fact, no one would have noticed Snow at all, except for her hair. Since the day she buried her father and mother, her hair had gone pale as an old woman's, It flowed down her thin body in all the colors of storm-whipped waves, slate and silver, ice and cloud, smoke and fog, ash and iron. The process had not hurt. She simply woke up, grave dirt still under her fingernails, and saw in the mirror that the colors of her home, which once glinted like lamplights in her thick curls, had fled. She was as colorless as ocean foam against the shivered planks of wrecked ships. And so it came to pass that the girl became a fixture among the fishwives who crowded the dock, tying their nets and mending sails, and for her hair they called her Snow. If they did not love her, as Muironners accepted, the Muironners accepted her presence and found bits of work that would keep her belly quiet, if not satisfied, looking the other way when she slept in the shipwright's cavernous warehouses, curled into the skeletons of half-built clippers. She sought the solace of shadows, keeping her head low and moving through her life with no more sorrow than she had already collected to her thin breast. One evening, as she sat with a round-faced woman knotting the last of the day's great silver nets with practiced fingers, she looked up from her work to find that the woman had tucked an orange into the yellow folds of her skirts. Snow glanced at her benefactor, whose loose brown hair curled tightly around a face that might have belonged to a well-fed gnome, merrily lumpy and red-cheeked. Her body was solid as a bull walrus, muscles bulging silkily beneath layers of fat. The woman winked at Snow without stopping her quick stitching, fleshy fingers flashing in and out of the flaxen ropes. Can't have those pretty teeth falling out, love. Oranges are like rubies up here, loved as gold and twice as rare. But an old friend of mine from the south sends me a crate every winter, and someone like you deserves a ruby or two from time to time. Snow turned the blazing fruit over in her hands. When she spoke, her voice was soft and hoarse, for she rarely talked at all, and it had grown as creaky as a brass gate from disuse. Where I was born, they grew from trees, hundreds of them, like drops of fire. My mother spiced cakes with the peels. So you did come from somewhere, the woman laughed, her thick body rippling like a bear in mid-roar. You didn't rise up from the waves fully formed on an abalone shell? Well, that's a relief. Wouldn't want to think I spent half my ship sitting thigh to thigh with a naiad. Snow blinked, brushing her high cheeks with lashes pale as snow-crusted sails. Is that what they say about me, truly? Some to be sure, love to tell tales. But no one says much about you. You've no prospects at all, and that means you'll be on these docks till you freeze to the boards. Not the sort of life to inspire the gossips to gnash their own pretty teeth. Snow did not scowl as another girl might, but simply pulled back the small tendrils of herself which had ever so briefly extended to a bright-voiced stranger. The woman extended her fat hand, studded with rough iron rings, to the girl's shoulder. Of course, I don't mean to be cruel, love. Not likely to be crowned queen of whale songs any summer soon either. There, Sigrid's tongue does tend to flap away without asking permission first. Don't worry, Snow said abruptly, shrugging off the hand. I won't cry. What you said is true enough, I know that. Sigrid gave the gray-haired child a long look, slow and appraising, a jeweler examining a use-blackened sapphire. We shall see, I suppose. I thought I knew what was true when I was young and beautiful. I thought I would always be able to run as fast as I pleased, and take such pleasure in simple meals of seal flanks and pelican eggs. Then the world changed, and I was no longer a maid, and I never knew again. Sigrid straightened, plunging her stubby hands back into her nets. I'll tell you a tale of my youth if you like. It'll pass the time. Snow nodded, willing to hear anything that would take her mind from the cold stiffening her fingers to stalactites, and the frozen night which would find her huddled and frozen in the belly of a hollow ship. And we will pick up tomorrow with the Net Weaver's Tale. Thank you all for coming. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask before the night's on? The awkward part while I wait for people to type if they're going to type. Well, I'll do our outro business while we're waiting. As always, for legal purposes, this has not been an audiobook of the Orphan's Tales. This has been a play. The music we heard in the beginning was by S.J. Tucker. You can find her on sjtucker.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Kat Valenti and subscribe to my Patreon at Kat Valenti. You can catch up with the archive at Kat Valenti Live on YouTube. These tend to go up about an hour to an hour and a half after the live stream ends, and you can watch them anytime. And there's a tip jar in my Instagram profile as well as on my website at katherinemvalenti.com. If you are so moved to toss a coin to your witch, it would be deeply appreciated, as everything is very tight for us this month. But if not, I completely understand, and these are free for anyone to watch. I will thank anybody who does on my stream next time. Did I ever include real dreams you've had in your stories? There's actually... yeah, I have. And there's a couple of images from a dream I had when I was, gosh, I'm not even sure I've ever told this story. I had this dream when I was like 14, and I wrote it all down as soon as I woke up, and I turned it into a short story. Now, do I have this somewhere in the house? Probably, but I can't be completely sure, as the child of divorce lost a lot of things between parents, and my mother didn't keep much of my stuff. So possibly I don't have a copy of it, but I may or may not. But I remember, because my first year of drama in high school, we had to do a long monologue, and it could be from a published play, or we could write our own. Well, you know me. So I brought in this thing I had written about this dream I had. And I performed the whole thing, much as I had done to you tonight. And it was the nicest thing any drama teacher ever said about me, that it was the kind of energy you would need to have a one-woman show. So for a 14-year-old, that was a lot to hear. So I remember that dream very well. And there's bits and pieces of that written down dream in quite a few parts of the Orphan's Tales. And I definitely had dreams that fueled the plot. I know I remember that. I remember waking up and turning to the bedside table and writing things down, but I can't remember specifically what they were at this point. What is my favorite mythology to create from? I'm very partial to Russian folklore, obviously. And I've probably retold the story of Snow White 5 or 6 times, maybe more. I can't be entirely certain. I mean, look at me. My whole life, Snow White has seemed to be a story about me. Not just because I have the coloring, but my parents were divorced young. I had a stepmother. It was a whole thing. But really, I think that just all and any mythology tends to get to me on some level or another. There'll be something that leaps out that really I find meaningful. I love Greek myth as well, but I never write about it. I hardly ever do. I know too much. But I might have a project brewing that will be very Greek in nature. We'll see. Mysterioso. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I hope that you all have a wonderful night, and as wonderful as you can have. At this time, our state only had 8 new cases today. That seems like a big deal. Read an article about how that doesn't matter, and the math is still really bad. But I'm a simple girl who writes fairy tales. I don't know. I don't understand that math. Only 8 seemed good to me. Is there any chance there'll be a Norse project in the future? I'm working on a book right now that's loosely based in Finnish folklore, but they're not a Norse culture. Maybe. I certainly grew up on it as well as I did Greek. I'll never say never. Maybe. I've written some Norse poetry and short fiction before, so possibly. All of you sleep well. All of you keep healthy, keep safe, keep indoors. And I will see you tomorrow, same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel, 8:30 Eastern time. Good night, everyone.